Hey everyone, welcome back to Missing Persons File Uncovered. Before we dive in today, I just want to ask you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Your support means everything to this channel and helps us continue bringing light to cases that deserve attention. Today's case is one that's been weighing heavily on my heart. We're going to talk about Dr. Spencer Tepe and his wife Monique, a young couple whose lives were stolen from them, leaving behind two small children who will grow up without their parents. This is a developing case, and I want to handle it with the care and respect it deserves because behind these headlines are real people, real families, and real grief. In Columbus, Ohio, what should have been an ordinary morning turned into every family's nightmare. Dr. Spencer Tepe, a dentist, and his wife Monique were found dead in their home. Their children, a 4-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son, were found unharmed but alone in the house with their deceased parents. The person now charged with their murders, Monique's ex-husband, Dr. McKee, a vascular surgeon. And here's what makes this even more tragic. Monique had been divorced from McKee for 8 years. 8 years. She had built a new life, found real love, started a family, and according to those who knew her, she was finally happy. But even after all that time, she apparently never stopped looking over her shoulder. A grand jury has now indicted McKee on 5 counts, 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary. These aren't just preliminary charges anymore. A grand jury reviewed the evidence and determined there's enough to move forward. McKee is being extradited back to Ohio and should face these charges in court by the end of this week. According to the indictment, investigators believe McKee used a firearm equipped with a suppressor when he entered the couple's home and shot both Monique and Spencer. The police chief has stated that shell casings found at the scene have been connected to a gun recovered from McKee's residence. That's a critical piece of evidence we'll talk more about in a moment. Now, new information has emerged about what was going on in McKee's life before these murders, and it paints a picture of someone whose world was unraveling. In 2024, while he was working for a surgical group in Nevada, a lawsuit was filed involving McKee's practice. The lawsuit alleges that a physician's assistant working under his supervision incorrectly inserted a catheter, leaving approximately 9 inches of it inside a patient's body. McKee was named in the lawsuit because he was responsible for training and supervising that physician's assistant. Here's what caught my attention. The legal team trying to serve McKee with this lawsuit attempted to do so 9 times and couldn't locate him. They went to his address. No one answered. They went to his former surgical practice in Las Vegas, and a colleague there reportedly said that McKee had simply disappeared. Think about that for a moment. A trained surgeon, someone who spent years in medical school, who took an oath to do no harm, allegedly running from his professional responsibilities. It suggests someone who was spiraling, someone who couldn't face the consequences of his actions. The Columbus police chief has officially classified these murders as an act of domestic violence. And when you hear from Monique's family, it becomes clear that this wasn't a surprise to them. It was something they feared. Monique's brother-in-law has spoken out, saying that he and many others in the family were well aware of the abuse Monique endured during her marriage to McKee. He used the word torment. He said Monique was willing to do anything to get away from him. A friend of Monique's shared something even more chilling. Monique believed McKee would never leave her alone for the rest of her life. And she was right. Even 8 years after their divorce, even after she'd remarried and had children with someone else, even after she'd built an entirely new life, he allegedly came for her. We still don't know what triggered this specific attack after 8 years. Was there recent contact between them? Had something changed in his life that pushed him over the edge? Those are questions investigators are likely working to answer right now. I need to pause here because this part is the hardest to process. Monique and Spencer's 2 children, ages 4 and 1, were in the house when this happened. They were found unharmed physically, but the psychological impact of this tragedy will follow them forever. According to family members, when friends and coworkers arrived for a wellness check after Monique and Spencer didn't show up for work, they could hear one of the children crying inside. Spencer's cousin believes it was the 1-year-old, likely unable to get out of his crib, crying because his parents weren't coming to get him. The family has said that the 4-year-old recently had to say goodbye to her mommy and daddy. She's old enough to understand that something terrible has happened, but hopefully too young to remember the details. The 1-year-old is too young to process any of this, which the family says is both a blessing and a tragedy because these children will never truly know their parents. Both children are now living with extended family. There's a GoFundMe set up to help with their care, and I'll link that in the description below. If you're able to contribute, please do. If not, sharing it helps too. Before we go further into the investigation, I want to share something with you. I found footage from Monique and Spencer's wedding, filmed by Monique's brother-in-law. I want you to hear their words to each other because I think it's important to remember who they were beyond this tragedy.
Spencer, what can I say? From day one, I knew you were something special. I had quite a journey to get to you, countless bad bumble dates, wrong relationships, and waterfalls of tears. But it was worth every cringing second because it led me to you. Throughout all of this, I knew that God was guiding me to my person, and that when I met him, it would be the most magical thing ever. And boy, is that an understatement. I finally found my lobster, and it honestly couldn't be a person with a more beautiful heart. I will love you forever, and I'm so lucky to be Mrs. Tepe.
By the power Listening to those vows, you can hear the joy, the hope, the future they were building together. Monique talked about her journey to find Spencer, about the wrong relationships and tears that came before, and how she knew God was guiding her to her person. She called meeting Spencer the most magical thing ever. She deserved that happiness, they both did, and it was stolen from them. Let me walk you through what investigators have found so far, because this evidence is not only significant, it's damning. And I want to break down each piece so you understand why this case, while tragic, seems pretty clear-cut from an investigative standpoint. First, let's talk about the suppressor. McKee allegedly used a suppressor, what many people call a silencer, attached to the firearm used in these murders. Now, I want you to think about what that means for a second. This isn't an accessory you pick up on a whim. This isn't something most people who own firearms for home protection or recreational shooting ever purchase. A suppressor serves one primary purpose: to muffle the sound of gunfire. Why would you need that? Well, if you're at a shooting range and want to protect your hearing, sure, that's one legitimate use. But if you're planning to shoot someone in their home in the middle of the night and you don't want neighbors to hear the shots, don't want the children down the hall to wake up, don't want anyone to realize what's happening until you're long gone, that's when you get a suppressor. The presence of that suppressor tells us something crucial about McKee's state of mind. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. This was calculated. He had to acquire the suppressor, which requires specific legal steps including ATF registration and paperwork. He had to attach it to the weapon. He had to plan this. And here's another thing about the suppressor that's incredibly telling. If Spencer woke up after the first shot, if he tried to fight back or defend his wife, the suppressor would have allowed McKee to fire multiple shots without alerting the entire neighborhood. It bought him time. It was tactical, and that level of planning speaks to premeditation in a way that's hard to argue against. Now, the shell casings. Investigators found shell casings at the crime scene, which is standard in any shooting. But here's where it gets interesting and, frankly, where McKee made one of his biggest mistakes. Those shell casings have been forensically matched to a gun that was found at McKee's residence. He kept the murder weapon. Let me say that again because it's so important. After allegedly committing a double homicide, McKee went home and kept the gun he used. He didn't throw it in a lake, didn't bury it, didn't dispose of it in any way. He just kept it. Why? There are a few possible explanations, and none of them are good for his defense. One possibility is arrogance. Maybe he thought, they'll never suspect me, I'm a respected surgeon. Why would I need to get rid of this gun? There's a certain ego that comes with being a doctor, particularly a surgeon. You're used to being the smartest person in the room, used to having control over life and death. Maybe that ego made him overconfident. Another possibility is that he simply didn't care. Maybe by the time he committed these murders, his life had fallen apart to such a degree that he didn't care about getting caught. Maybe on some level, he wanted to be caught. Or maybe, and this is darker, he wanted to keep the gun because it represented power and control in a life where he felt he had none. Whatever the reason, keeping that weapon was a catastrophic error in judgment. Ballistic evidence is incredibly reliable. When you can match shell casings from a crime scene to a specific firearm, that's about as close to a smoking gun as you can get in a criminal investigation. Here's something that keeps coming up, something that honestly keeps me up at night thinking about this case. There was no forced entry into the home. No broken windows, no kicked-in doors, no signs of someone breaking in. So how did McKee get inside? There are several theories circulating, and investigators are likely exploring all of them. Let me walk you through the possibilities. Theory 1, he knew the door code. If Monique and Spencer had a keypad entry system, and if Monique had used the same code from when she was married to McKee, he could have simply punched it in and walked right in. It sounds too easy, too convenient, but you'd be surprised how many people use the same codes for years, even after major life changes. Maybe it was her birthday, maybe it was a zip code, maybe it was some significant number that she never thought to change. Theory 2. He could have watched them from a distance with some kind of telephoto lens or surveillance and observed them entering their code. If he'd been stalking the home, casing it over time, he could have positioned himself across the street and simply watched them come and go, noting which numbers they pressed. Theory 3, and this is more disturbing, he could have waited until someone opened the door and forced his way in at gunpoint. Maybe Monique answered the door, not knowing he was there, and he pushed his way inside before she could react. Theory 4, the door might have simply been unlocked. It's a terrible thought, but in neighborhoods where people feel safe, it's not uncommon for people to forget to lock their doors, especially if they're just running inside for a moment or getting ready for bed. We don't know which of these scenarios is accurate, and investigators haven't released those details publicly. But the absence of forced entry tells us that however he got in, it didn't require obvious violence at the entry point. That's significant because it might mean the first moments of this crime were quiet, that Monique and Spencer may not have had any warning that danger was literally at their doorstep. Investigators are combing through surveillance footage from the neighborhood. We know that at least one camera captured a figure in a back alley near the house, about a block or two away. While it hasn't been officially confirmed that this was McKee, it's consistent with what you'd expect if someone was surveilling the house or approaching it on foot to avoid detection. Modern investigations rely heavily on this kind of digital evidence. There are cameras everywhere now, doorbell cameras, security systems, traffic cameras, businesses with parking lot surveillance. If McKee drove to Columbus from wherever he was living, investigators will likely be able to track his route. Toll booth cameras, license plate readers, gas station footage, all of these create a digital trail. If he made multiple trips to Columbus in the weeks or months leading up to the murders, if he was stalking Monique or watching the house, those trips will leave evidence. Cell phone tower pings can place a phone in a specific geographic area. Credit card transactions can show where he stopped for gas or food. This is tedious, painstaking work that requires investigators to go through potentially hundreds of hours of footage and thousands of records. But this is how modern cases are built. It's not just about the physical evidence at the crime scene anymore. It's about creating a complete timeline of the suspect's movements and activities. While it hasn't been officially confirmed publicly, it would be standard in an investigation like this for forensic teams to collect DNA evidence from the crime scene. If McKee was physically inside that house, there's a very good chance he left biological evidence behind. A single hair, skin cells, traces of sweat, anything like that can be analyzed and matched. And with the amount of physical activity involved in what allegedly happened, a struggle, a shooting, movement through the house, it would be almost impossible not to leave some kind of DNA evidence. If investigators have DNA placing McKee at the scene, combined with the ballistic evidence from the gun, you're looking at a nearly insurmountable wall of evidence for the defense to overcome. Now, you might be wondering why there are 4 counts of aggravated murder when there were 2 victims. This is actually a really smart prosecutorial strategy, and I want to explain it because it shows you how prosecutors think about these cases. 2 of the murder charges are based on the theory that McKee committed premeditated, calculated murder with intent. Basically, he planned this. He intended to kill Monique and Spencer, and he carried out that plan. This is your classic first-degree murder scenario. But prosecutors are also including 2 additional murder charges based on a different legal theory. Murder committed during the commission of another felony, in this case, burglary. Even if his defense attorney tries to argue, he didn't plan to kill them, he just came to talk and things went wrong. The prosecutor can say, okay, but he illegally entered their home with the intent to commit a crime, and during that illegal entry, 2 people died. That's still aggravated murder. It's what we call a fail-safe. It gives the prosecution multiple pathways to a murder conviction. A jury would have to believe that McKee didn't plan the murders and that he didn't illegally enter the home for any criminal purpose. That's a very high bar for the defense. This kind of charging is common in serious cases because it protects against the possibility that a defense attorney might create enough reasonable doubt about one theory of the crime but not others. The prosecution is essentially saying, we believe he planned this and intended murder, but even if you're not convinced of that beyond a reasonable doubt, you can still convict him of murder based on the burglary. What we haven't heard much about yet, but what is almost certainly a major part of this investigation, is the digital forensic evidence. Investigators will be going through phone records, text messages, emails, social media activity, everything. Did McKee and Monique have any recent communication? Were there threatening messages? Was he monitoring her social media, watching her post about her happy family life? Even if Monique had blocked McKee on social media, there are ways around that. Mutual friends, alternate accounts, simply logging out and viewing public profiles. If Monique's Instagram or Facebook was public, McKee could have been watching every post, every photo of her happy family, every milestone with her children, every loving caption about Spencer. And that kind of digital surveillance, if investigators can prove it, can establish obsession, stalking behavior, motive. It creates a narrative about McKee's state of mind leading up to the murders. Investigators will also be looking at McKee's search history. Did he research how to use a suppressor? Did he look up Monique's address? Did he search for information about Columbus, Ohio, or map routes from his location to her home? People often don't realize how much digital evidence they leave behind when they're planning a crime. The modern criminal investigation is as much about digital forensics as it is about traditional detective work. And that digital evidence can be incredibly damning because it shows planning, intent, and state of mind in ways that physical evidence sometimes can't. Who does something like this? Who plans and executes the murder of their ex-wife and her new husband 8 years after a divorce? I know a lot of you have been asking this in the comments on previous videos, and I want to dig into it because understanding the psychology here might help us make sense of what seems senseless. Let me start by saying this. We're not diagnosing anyone. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but based on the evidence we have, the patterns we see in similar cases, and what we know about McKee's life, we can start to piece together a psychological profile. The surgeon's mindset. McKee is a vascular surgeon. That's important to understand because the personality traits that often make someone successful in surgery can also be the same traits that, when taken to an extreme or when combined with other factors, can lead to destructive behavior. Surgeons, generally speaking, need to have incredible confidence. When you're literally holding someone's life in your hands, when you're making incisions and manipulating blood vessels and organs, you can't second-guess yourself. You need to believe in your abilities absolutely. You need to be able to make split-second decisions under pressure. You need to be able to compartmentalize emotion and focus entirely on the task at hand. These are admirable qualities in an operating room, but outside of that environment, this same personality type can manifest as arrogance, an inability to admit mistakes, a need for absolute control, and difficulty accepting when things don't go their way. There's actually quite a bit of research on this. Studies have shown that surgeons, more than other types of physicians, tend to score higher on measures of narcissism and lower on measures of empathy. Again, this doesn't mean all surgeons are narcissists or lack empathy, but the profession tends to attract and reward certain personality traits. And when you combine that surgical personality with a life that's falling apart, with professional failures, with the humiliation of being served with a malpractice lawsuit, with watching your ex-wife thrive while you're struggling, you can see how that might create a perfect storm. One of the most common threads in cases like this is control. When people who are used to being in control of their environment, their career, their relationships, suddenly feel that control slipping away, the psychological impact can be profound. McKee spent years in medical training learning to control his environment. Surgeons don't just hope for good outcomes, they engineer them. They study, they practice, they perfect their technique. They control every variable they can in the operating room. Now imagine that same person facing a malpractice lawsuit, potentially losing their medical license or their reputation. Imagine them being served papers and choosing to run, to hide, to avoid service 9 different times. That's not someone who's facing their problems. That's someone who's trying to maintain control by avoiding reality. And then there's Monique. She was married to him, and according to family members, the marriage was abusive. She was someone he could control, someone he had power over. But then she left. She divorced him. She moved on. She found someone else. She had children with someone else. She built a beautiful life that he wasn't part of. For someone with control issues, that's intolerable. It's not just that she left, it's that she's happy. She's thriving. She's living proof that life is better without him, and he can't control that narrative. One of the biggest questions in this case is, why now? Why 8 years after the divorce? What triggered this specific act of violence at this specific time? We don't have a definitive answer to that yet, but let me offer some theories based on what we know and what we see in similar cases. First, domestic violence doesn't operate on a normal timeline. We often think of domestic violence as something that happens during a relationship, but the most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim is often after they leave. The separation is seen as the ultimate loss of control, and some abusers can't accept that. 8 years might seem like a long time to us, but for someone who's obsessive, who's been monitoring their ex-wife's life through social media, who's been watching her happiness from afar and feeling increasingly bitter about it, 8 years might feel like yesterday. Second, there's likely a triggering event. Something probably happened in McKee's life recently that pushed him over the edge. Maybe the malpractice lawsuit was weighing on him more heavily than we know. Maybe he lost his job or faced other professional consequences. Maybe he had a relationship end, a financial crisis, a health scare. Something probably destabilized him further. When people are in crisis, they often look for someone to blame. It's easier to externalize your problems than to take responsibility for them. And for McKee, Monique might have been the perfect scapegoat. In his mind, maybe everything went wrong in his life after she left. Maybe he convinced himself that she ruined everything. That kind of distorted thinking is common in abusers. Third, there's the comparison factor. If McKee was watching Monique's life on social media, seeing her happy family, her loving husband, her beautiful children, and then looking at his own life falling apart, that contrast might have become unbearable. Psychologists call this social comparison theory. We constantly compare ourselves to others, and when that comparison is unfavorable, it can lead to intense negative emotions. For someone who's already unstable, already angry, already blaming their ex for their problems, watching her thrive while they suffer can be psychologically devastating. Here's something that really gets to me about this case. McKee allegedly walked into a home where children were sleeping and committed a double murder. How do you reconcile that with someone who took an oath to do no harm? How does a surgeon, someone trained to save lives, take lives so deliberately? The answer is compartmentalization. It's the same psychological mechanism that allows surgeons to cut into human bodies without being paralyzed by the weight of what they're doing. You separate the emotional from the practical. You create mental boxes. In McKee's mind, if the allegations are true, Monique and Spencer were problems to be solved. They weren't human beings with value and lives and people who loved them. They were obstacles. They were the source of his pain. And once you dehumanize someone like that, once you reduce them to just an obstacle, the moral weight of harming them diminishes in your mind. And the children, he probably told himself they weren't his target. They weren't part of the problem he was solving. He compartmentalized them into a different mental category. This is why, as horrific as this crime is, the children were physically unharmed. He wasn't there to hurt children. He was there to eliminate what he saw as the source of his suffering. I want to be clear, I'm not excusing any of this. I'm trying to explain it. There's a difference. Understanding the psychology doesn't diminish the horror of what happened. Let's go back to the fact that McKee kept the murder weapon. That's not just a mistake, it's a window into his psychology. Keeping the gun suggests one of two things, possibly both. Either he was so arrogant that he genuinely believed he wouldn't get caught, or he was so defeated that he didn't care if he did. The arrogance explanation aligns with what we know about narcissistic personalities. There's often this belief that they're smarter than everyone else, that they can outsmart the police, that the rules don't really apply to them in the same way they apply to other people. They won't suspect me. I'm a doctor. I'm a pillar of the community. Why would I need to dispose of the gun? That would look suspicious. That kind of thinking, as irrational as it sounds, is actually pretty common among people who commit crimes while in positions of professional authority. They're used to being trusted, respected, deferred to. They think that status will protect them. The defeatist explanation is darker in some ways. Maybe by the time McKee allegedly committed these murders, he'd already given up on his life. Maybe he'd decided that if his life was over anyway, if everything he'd worked for was crumbling, then what did it matter if he got caught? That's a mindset we sometimes see in murder-suicides, where someone decides that since their life is essentially over, they're going to take someone else down with them. McKee didn't die by suicide, but that same underlying psychology might have been at play. We know from Monique's friends that she lived in fear of McKee. Even 8 years after the divorce, she apparently told people she thought he would never leave her alone. That suggests ongoing harassment or surveillance. We don't know the full extent of it yet, but investigators are almost certainly looking into whether McKee had been stalking Monique, either physically or digitally. Physical stalking would mean showing up at her home, her workplace, following her. Digital stalking would mean monitoring her social media, possibly even using technology to track her phone or her car. Either way, if Monique felt that level of fear 8 years after leaving him, that tells us this was someone who had maintained an obsessive focus on her for nearly a decade. And here's the thing about stalking behavior, it almost always escalates. It starts with checking social media, then it becomes driving by the house, then it becomes sitting outside for hours, then it becomes more direct contact or confrontation. It's a progressive pattern. The fact that this allegedly ended in murder suggests that McKee had been on an escalating path for a while. The murder wasn't the beginning, it was the culmination. We can't ignore what was happening in McKee's professional life. The malpractice lawsuit, the difficulty being served, reports that he had essentially disappeared from his practice in Las Vegas. All of this points to someone whose career was imploding. For someone whose entire identity is wrapped up in being a doctor, in being a surgeon, in having that status and respect, professional failure can be psychologically catastrophic. It's not just losing a job, it's losing your sense of self. And when people experience that kind of identity crisis, especially people who aren't emotionally equipped to process failure or vulnerability, they often look for external sources to blame. They need a narrative that preserves their ego. It's not that I made mistakes, it's that people are out to get me. It's that the system is rigged against me. It's that my ex-wife ruined my life and I've never been able to recover. That kind of blame shifting can become all-consuming. And when you combine it with access to weapons, with a history of domestic violence, with obsessive thinking about your ex-partner, you have all the ingredients for a tragedy like this. Early reports from McKee's court appearance described him as emotionless. He didn't appear distraught, didn't appear remorseful, didn't appear like someone who had just been accused of murdering 2 people. That emotional flatness can be interpreted a few different ways. It could be shock. It could be dissociation, where the mind essentially disconnects from reality as a protective mechanism. It could be the effects of being on suicide watch in jail, possibly medicated. But it could also be a lack of genuine remorse. And if that's the case, it would be consistent with someone who has narcissistic or antisocial personality traits. People with those traits often lack the capacity for genuine empathy or remorse. They might understand intellectually that what they did was wrong, but they don't feel it emotionally. When caught, they're often more upset about the consequences to themselves than about the harm they caused to others. They're angry they got caught, not sorry for what they did. Again, we're not diagnosing, but these patterns are worth noting because they help us understand how someone could allegedly do something this horrific and then show so little outward emotion about it. McKee will be in court this week to face these charges. He could choose to fight this to take it to trial, or he could accept a plea deal. Based on the evidence that's been made public, including the matched shell casings and the use of a suppressor, a conviction seems likely. The question is whether he'll put Monique and Spencer's families through the pain of a trial, or whether he'll take responsibility for what he's done. I'll continue following this case and updating you as new information emerges. These families deserve justice, and those children deserve to know that the person who took their parents from them will be held accountable. If you or someone you know is in an abusive relationship, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-790-97233. Abuse doesn't always end when a relationship ends, as we've tragically seen in this case. Thank you for watching Missing Persons File Uncovered. Please subscribe if you haven't already and turn on notifications so you don't miss updates on this case. Share this video to help spread awareness about domestic violence and its devastating impact. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'll see you in the next one.